Need for Speed is a franchise that has created some of the most iconic games of pretty much all time. Having the ability to make lightning strike in the same place twice, and then capturing said lightning and having it strike again and again, really cementing themselves as the hit makers that we know today. The black box era of Need for Speed games is the most relevant and noticeable era of Need for Speed games. The studio that made Need for Speed what it is today, the same studio that brought us the Need for Speed Underground games, Most Wanted and Carbon, which to the Need for Speed community are the best games of the whole franchise. Even up to this day, the community are absolute diehard fans of the black box era. The most iconic car of all time is the BMW M3 GTR. This car is a product of the black box era of Need for Speed games and has never seen a rival in popularity. A car that has been in almost every Need for Speed game from Most Wanted 2005 to Need for Speed Unbound. Even though the black box era has been over for a long time, the memories of the most iconic game in the franchise and the most iconic car in the franchise still remain in people's hearts and memories. Each Need for Speed game from the first Underground onwards had a cover car, which was on the cover of the game, which would usually be the car of the main antagonist or of the protagonist. In the case of Need for Speed Most Wanted 2005, it was the car of the protagonist and of the main antagonist. To this day, the main mascot for the Need for Speed franchise is the BMW M3 GTR from Need for Speed Most Wanted 2005, and if you ask me, I think it will always be the mascot of Need for Speed. The BMW M3 GTR is the last hurrah to the illegal street racing genre, which with black boxes shut down was when the genre fell off, and car games have absolutely struggled to capture that illegal street racing aesthetic that everyone knew and loved. The other thing is that Need for Speed hasn't focused on making iconic games anymore. They just do the bare minimum and then call it a day. So I am not surprised that they cling to the only era that gave Need for Speed relevance, and that is the black box era. The BMW M3 GTR is a really interesting car because of where it comes from, which is the crazy part. The BMW M3 GTR in the Most Wanted 2005 game is actually based off of a real racing car that has a very similar resemblance, if not a mirror image of the real thing. The BMW M3 GTR is a nod to the illegal street racing scene because of all the specs and mods on that car, which are probably not even street legal because racing cars have certain regulations that are not allowed on the street, but it adds more value to the aesthetic of the legal street racing scene. The cars that are not street legal are always running from the cops and tearing up the streets in races at all hours of the day, causing havoc and chaos for the police and everyday citizens and civilians on the road. I now understand why the cops were so hard in Most Wanted 2005 and why they were so much fun. Most Wanted 2005 still to this day has the best cops ever. Need for Speed Most Wanted 2005 really was a game changer. It added just the right amount of content to Need for Speed but also took away a lot. The transition from Underground to Most Wanted was pretty big, but it seemed to be well received, with Most Wanted having a more western approach to its car list and focusing less on the whole midnight club aesthetic like Underground and Underground 2, with Most Wanted 2005 having less Japanese cars and more American, exotic and German cars, which I must admit that I really liked because I really like JDM, but there's just something crazy about those exotic cars. I also understand that Need for Speed Most Wanted 2005 had a completely different focus. For example, focusing more on grip and speed as opposed to circuit racing and drifting like Underground and Underground 2. The change was welcomed, and then in Need for Speed Carbon they added a lot more cars, even brought back drifting to the game. Carbon was more or less a mix between Underground and Most Wanted, and the merge was well received. The game had more of a focus on exotic cars, hence the name Carbon, being that some exotic cars were made out of carbon, and this is where you still get the signature BMW M3 GTR that we all know and love. The BMW M3 GTR made an appearance in Need for Speed Carbon and was the main protagonist car yet again, and Need for Speed Carbon picks up right after the events of Need for Speed Most Wanted 2005, with Sergeant Cross still hot on your heels after you got away from the cops in the Most Wanted 2005 ending. The sad part is that the BMW M3 GTR gets totaled in the intro of the game, which really sucks because I'm sure the fans would have loved to drive that car in Carbon, but we were deprived of that opportunity in Carbon, and from what I have seen, that is the last time we would ever really see and play the legendary BMW M3 GTR again. The legacy of the M3 GTR still lives on. It lives on through the fans of the Most Wanted 2005 and on the latest NFS games, with the M3 GTR still being in both the latest Need for Speed games. It has cemented itself in the franchise as the greatest car of all time, not clinging onto nostalgia but literally being an icon of nostalgia. People always said I was the one living in the past and that I hate new concepts and that I am just getting old, but the evidence speaks for itself. Even though the greatest era of Need for Speed games is over and Black Box shut down, we know that Need for Speed Most Wanted 2005, Black Box, and the legendary BMW M3 GTR still live on in spirit through the driver's seat of the BMW M3 GTR. And with that, this is the Chilly Man signing off. I thank everyone for watching. Peace out.